This happened to me when I was 14. I'm 34 now. This is a story about a relative of mine. Let's just call her Mrs. A. When I was a child, Mrs. A's husband passed away. She used to be very talkative and outgoing. However, after the loss of her husband, her personality changed. She became very quiet and distant. One night, towards the end of basketball, I think it was about 8:30 p.m., I saw Mrs. A stood at the gym doors. Although I hadn't seen her for a few years, I recognized her. At first, I said to one of the teachers, "Oh, she's a relative of mine." My teacher bowed and walked over to her. They began a conversation. My teacher walked back to me with a serious look on his face.
"I've just heard that your father has been in a serious car accident.
I was speechless.
Your relative over there has come to take you to the hospital. Please, go with her."
I was mortified. We got into her car and we pulled away from the school, speeding down the dark streets. I began to ask Mrs. A many questions. "Where's my dad?"
"Hospital.
"Where's the hospital?"
A little bit further from here."
"What kind of condition is he in?"
"I don't know, really."
I was shocked by her blunt and uncomforting answers. She was solely focused on driving. I felt no warmth from her. She seemed heartless to me. We were heading into the suburbs. The further we drove, the more suspicious I became. I live in a rural area in the mountains, and I knew that all the main hospitals are in the city. Once you head towards the mountains, there aren't any hospitals until the next city over, which is far. Every time I started talking to her or asking her questions, she replied with the same cold, blunt answer.
"Yeah."
I started to wonder if the woman driving the car really was my relative. We were no longer driving on city roads. Shops and houses were getting scarcer and scarcer. I knew that before long, we would be really far into the countryside. I saw the light of a home center up ahead. It was still open. I quickly said, "Oh, I forgot something. I really have to call my teacher. He asked me to do him this favor and I really need to call him now to tell him I can't." I managed to persuade her to pull over at the home center, at which point I burst out of her car and into the home center. I thought that I wouldn't be seen from the inside. I looked through the store's window. I saw Mrs. A's car in the parking lot. She wasn't in the driver's seat. She was walking towards the store. I had a terrible feeling when I saw her approaching. I ran to the other side of the store and sprinted through the exit doors onto the streets. Luckily, a taxi was approaching. I ran in front of his car and got him to stop. I told him my address, and I was on my way back home, all the while worried about my father. When I finally arrived home, my mum paid the taxi fare. I walked into my house and saw my father sat in the living room, drinking a beer and watching TV. What's the matter with you? What's with the look on your face?" he asked. As I explained to him what happened, his face turned pale. He looked terribly concerned. Apparently, when Mrs. A's husband passed away, she suffered a nervous breakdown and she was admitted into hospital. She lost contact with the family because many family members grew worried by her strange behavior. My father said that because she doesn't have her own children, she was always alone and perhaps that affected her mental state or made her interested in me. First, my father called her home phone number. No answer. In those days, mobile phones weren't so popular. She didn't have one. We couldn't try that. And then my father called Mrs. A's family home. Her mother answered and told us that Mrs. A had been absent from her part-time job, and they had just called to ask where she was. The next day, the police searched her home. In their report, They noted that Mrs. A's purse and various valuable items were still left there. They were at a loss as to the location of Mrs. A and her car, or what current status they were in. They did find lots of empty cans and bottles of alcohol in her home, and prescription drugs. Now it's 20 years later, and we haven't seen or heard from Mrs. A, and no one knows her whereabouts. Perhaps I was the last person to see her. Through that window of that home center, due to the long absence, in the eyes of the law, nothing can be done about her, or her attempted abduction. I can't help imagine what could have happened to me if on that day I didn't get out of the car. Where was she planning on taking me? I wonder sometimes if she's out there, stalking me, watching me. I have so many unanswered questions. This happened about 20 years ago, when I was at high school. Our family had just moved into a brand new building. Every day was full of excitement in our new home. We used to live in a small apartment, but our new home was very spacious. It was amazing. Our new place was on the ground floor. It came with a garden. Even though it was small, I loved it. Opposite our garden was a big apartment block. We could see people coming and going, up and down the corridors to their homes. After a few weeks, my mother said,
"Oh, the underwear I hung out to dry in the garden is gone."
Ew. Did we have an underwear thief? Because we live on the ground floor, I thought that there's no way someone could have jumped over the wall into our garden. It was too high. I thought that maybe they could have used a stick or a long pole with a hook or something to steal our underwear. I didn't want to think about it much. One day, when I went into the garden, there was a man on the 4th or 5th floor of the building opposite. He was stood completely still and blankly staring at me. He looked to be in his 20s. He was wearing a sweatshirt, tracky bottoms, very casual looking guy. He began walking down the corridor towards the stairs, very slowly. He kept staring at me. I was freaked out by his stare. A chill went up my spine. I couldn't bear it anymore. I went back into the house and hid in my bedroom. His stare felt perverse. After this incident, we stopped drying our laundry in the garden. Sometime later, I noticed something. Something dropped into our garden. I looked closer. It was a set of tweezers. But they weren't the everyday use kind of tweezers. They looked like they were from a hospital or something. The kind used in operations. They had grips on their handles, and they were really long. Of course, they didn't belong to anyone in my family. No one knew who they belonged to or where they came from. At this point, we noticed 3 weird things had happened. The underwear going missing, the stranger staring at me, and now a huge pair of tweezers. It felt like someone was targeting our family, but for what purpose? Several days after I found the tweezers, the doorbell rang. My mother went to answer it. I was at school at the time. A man was stood at the front door. My mother asked him what he wanted. He replied,
I dropped my tweezers in your garden a few days ago, so I want to go get them."
Any way you think about it, unless he threw them in our garden, there's no way he could have dropped them there. Knowing this, my mother asked him how he dropped them into our garden. He replied,
"I live in the opposite apartment block. I was jumping in the corridor, and they fell out of my pocket.
When I heard about this exchange later, I got goosebumps. He jumped, and they magically fell 10 meters across the way into our garden. All of his behavior sounded odd. Jumping up and down in a corridor of an apartment block was weird. Walking around carrying a huge pair of tweezers was weird. Waiting a few days and coming back to get them from our garden, that's just scary. I got frightened. I imagined coming home from school and seeing him in the garden with those tweezers. It's terrifying. My mother told him we didn't find any tweezers in our garden. They weren't there, and she sent him on his way. She told me that she was being vigilant at this time. She didn't open the door fully and kept the chain on. She didn't want to look him in the eye either. She said that his voice sounded young, and she wouldn't be surprised if it was the strange guy who stared at me in the garden. A few weeks passed after he came to our door, and no more suspicious incidents occurred. I heard from a classmate who lives in the building opposite that a man who lives there had been arrested for stealing underwear. I have no idea if it was Mr. Tweezers or not. Even though he caused me no direct harm, the idea that he had been watching me was chilling. So I stopped going out into the garden. If I had to go into the garden, I would make the time I spent there as short as possible. This incident shocked me. It ruined all the joy of moving into a new house. Since then, whenever I have moved house, I have never chosen to live on the ground floor. This happened when I was at university. My friend had just moved into a new apartment. Me and a bunch of friends decided to drop in on him. His place wasn't new, but it wasn't exactly old. It was pretty decent. His apartment was 3 stories high. There was a narrow staircase leading to the entrance, and a little path leading to the room on the ground floor. Opposite was a bicycle parking area. My friend's room was on the corner of the 2nd floor. On that day, there was rain. We went to the local supermarket to get some beers and some snacks. We were heading back to his room to surprise him. We went into his apartment. I put my bag down, folded up my umbrella, when one of my friends shouted. What's the matter with you? You jumped me out of my skin," I said. We all looked at the friend who shouted, and then followed his eye line. He was looking over the stairs towards the bicycle parking area. A woman was stood beneath a flickering light in the corridor. She stood out because she was dressed entirely in black. She looked to be about 30 or 40. She had long dark hair too. Because her hair was completely black, and her clothes were too, it looked like her white face was just floating in the darkness. That woman was just stood there, staring at us. No, she wasn't staring at us. She was staring in our direction, as if she was staring beyond us. We were surprised. We gave her a little bow as an apology, because we were all staring at her. As soon as we went into his apartment, we started to talk about that woman. She was creepy. Yeah, that was scary. I mean, what the hell is she doing down there? Does she even live here? If she lives here, I wonder why she just doesn't go to her own apartment. Hey, come on guys, don't freak me out. I just moved in. We drank beers and played games and completely forgot about that woman. Later, when we were out of beers, 2 of my friends wanted to go on a beer run. Me and the owner of the apartment waited for them. Within 5 minutes, they burst back in. They said, "Guys, let's all go. That woman's still standing there. It's too creepy." My friend who just moved in was too freaked out to go, and since the rest of us were pretty buzzed, we went to get the drinks. We joked it was like a dare. When I came to the bottom of the stairs, I took a glance towards the place I saw her last, and yep, there she was, in the exact same spot staring off into the distance. What the hell? While we were on our way to the convenience store, we talked about her more. I said, when we get back, I'll go and say hello to her, and I'll let you know what happens. I was curious. It was the alcohol's fault. However, when we got back, she wasn't there anymore. Deep down, I was actually relieved, but we did find her disappearance mysterious. I stayed over and left my friend's house the next morning. Nothing else strange happened that night. A few weeks went by, and I bumped into my friend who'd moved in. He told me he was thinking of moving out.
What? You're moving? You only just moved in,
I said. And he looked at the floor and just said, that woman. According to my friend, that woman appears every rainy day and just stands in the exact same spot under the light in the bicycle parking area. He said every time it rained, he couldn't help getting frightened. I couldn't understand that woman's behavior, but I thought that moving out was unnecessary. My friend said that he tried to start a conversation with that woman. That's pretty brave, I thought. It went like this. Hello. I moved in on the second floor recently. Sorry about the other night. Sorry if my friends and I were a bit loud. She said nothing. She didn't even look at him either. She stared off into the distance and didn't say a single word. He even contacted the owner of the building, but nothing came of it. Whenever it rains, even if it's the morning or the middle of the night, she'll always be there, he told me. She just stood there staring into space. She didn't do anything to anyone, but it's creepy. And I want to move away from there as fast as I can, he said. I thought she was a ghost, but she's not. She just stands there whenever it rains. I wonder why. I wonder what she saw. What happened to her? After a few months, my friend was able to move out. He never found out who that woman was. Perhaps she still stands in the corridor, beneath that gloomy light to this day.